Ultra Instinct was never a power meant to be mastered. That belief is the first thing Dragon Ball quietly dismantles. Not through spectacle, but through consequence. Because the moment Goku reaches for Ultra Instinct, the rules that once rewarded effort, training, and raw willpower begin to distort. Control no longer guarantees survival. Strength no longer outweighs cost. And every second spent inside this state carries a debt that cannot be paid with stamina alone. This is not a form that amplifies who Goku is. It actively erases parts of him, collapsing instinct, identity, and intent into something dangerously efficient. One long decision followed by silence. Then movement. And that shift changes the logic of power scaling in Dragon Ball forever. For most of the series, Goku's growth follows a familiar rhythm. Struggle exposes a limit. Training pushes past it. Transformation becomes proof. Even gods obey that structure. But Ultra Instinct rejects it completely. It does not respond to desire. It does not activate through rage or resolve. It appears only when the mind stops trying to win. And that is why Goku's first contact with Ultra Instinct is unstable, incomplete, and nearly fatal. His body moves without permission, but his consciousness lags behind, watching actions it didn't choose. The power gap it creates is obvious, yet the strategic cost is invisible at first. Every dodge is perfect. Every counter lands without hesitation. But the longer this continues, the more Goku loses access to decision-making itself. This is where Ultra Instinct separates itself from every transformation before it. Super Saiyan was emotion weaponized. Super Saiyan Blue was discipline refined. Even Kaioken stacked power through conscious risk. Ultra Instinct removes choice entirely. The body acts before thought, and in doing so, it strips away the tactical layer that once defined Goku's combat genius. He is no longer adapting mid-fight. He is reacting instantly, flawlessly, and without foresight. That seems like evolution, until the narrative pressure reveals the flaw. A fighter who cannot choose cannot retreat, cannot sacrifice position, cannot fake weakness. Perfect response becomes predictable over time, not because it is slow, but because it is absolute. The Tournament of Power frames this idea carefully. Goku does not dominate because he understands Ultra Instinct. He survives because his opponents cannot yet read it. Each exchange raises the physical ceiling while lowering his margin for error. His breathing shortens. His posture tightens. The aura around him isn't explosive, it's restrained, almost suffocating, as if the form itself is compressing his limits inward. This is not a reward state. It's a system override. And systems do not care about survival once their function is complete. What makes Ultra Instinct narratively heavy is not how strong it is, but how little it belongs to Goku at first. Gods of Destruction spend lifetimes approaching it, not because it is difficult to activate, but because living inside it demands emotional subtraction. Ego, fear, hesitation, pride, all of it interferes. Goku, by contrast, reaches it through collapse. His energy detonates, his body breaks down, and instinct fills the vacuum left behind. That origin matters. Because mastery, in this case, does not mean more power. It means learning how not to disappear inside the form. As the arc progresses, Ultra Instinct exposes a contradiction at the heart of Goku's character. He thrives on learning through battle, on adjusting strategy through failure. Ultra Instinct denies him that feedback loop. When he dodges perfectly, he doesn't learn why. When he strikes flawlessly, he doesn't analyze the opening. The form consumes information instead of generating it. And this is why early Ultra Instinct cannot last. It is too efficient to be sustainable, too clean, too silent. The turning point doesn't arrive through dominance. It arrives through imbalance. The moment Goku tries to hold Ultra Instinct instead of letting it pass through him, the cost spikes. Muscles tear. He destabilizes. His heart rate fractures the rhythm of the form itself. This is where mastery begins to redefine itself, not as permanence, but as negotiation. The question stops being whether Goku can stay in Ultra Instinct and becomes whether he can allow fragments of himself back in without collapsing the state entirely. This is why the later evolution of Ultra Instinct feels less divine and more human. The aura sharpens, but the movement gains hesitation, not as a flaw, but as intent. Goku begins to reintroduce choice. Micro-decisions, deliberate pauses, acknowledgement of damage instead of automatic avoidance. From a power scaling perspective, this looks like regression. From a narrative perspective, it is the first time Ultra Instinct stops being a borrowed system and starts becoming a personal one. The form no longer replaces Goku's identity. It bends around it. And that shift is dangerous in a different way. Because now, Ultra Instinct is no longer bound by godly neutrality. It absorbs Goku's instincts, his aggression, his joy in combat. The balance tilts again. Not toward collapse, but toward instability of another kind. A form that was once pure reaction now carries intent, and intent introduces risk. This version can hit harder, push further, and stay active longer. But every gain reopens the possibility of overcommitment, of choosing the wrong moment to press forward. At this stage, Ultra Instinct stops being the final answer and becomes a question the story keeps asking. How much of Goku can exist inside a form designed to erase the self? How much control can be layered onto instinct before it ceases to function as instinct at all? The mastery here is not measured by duration or dominance, but by how cleanly Goku can move between surrender and assertion without tearing himself apart. And the closer he gets to that balance, the more fragile it becomes. Because true mastery, in this case, does not stabilize the form. It exposes its ceiling. And that ceiling is not power. It is consequence. That consequence reshapes how Ultra Instinct should be read going forward. Not as a peak to be held, but as a threshold that punishes permanence. The more Goku understands this, the less he treats Ultra Instinct as a destination. It becomes a state he brushes against, steps into, and then steps away from before it can exact its full cost. This is where the idea of mastery finally stops meaning dominance and starts meaning restraint. From a power scaling perspective, this reframes the hierarchy entirely. Ultra Instinct is not the strongest form because it wins every exchange. It is the strongest because it rewrites engagement rules. Opponents can no longer rely on pressure, speed, or even prediction. But the trade-off is subtle. Goku is no longer building momentum. He is borrowing it. Each flawless movement drains something that cannot be restored through recovery alone. And that creates a quiet timer hanging over every fight. Not a visible countdown, but a structural one. Narratively, this places Goku in unfamiliar territory. He has always been defined by escalation, fighting longer, pushing harder, breaking limits through endurance. Ultra Instinct denies him that path. The form does not reward persistence. It punishes it. Staying longer is not bravery. It is recklessness. And this is why Goku's growth around Ultra Instinct feels internal rather than explosive. The spectacle is secondary. The real shift happens in how he chooses when not to use it. This restraint shows up in the way his combat rhythm changes. Movements are still sharp, but they are no longer constant. There are gaps, controlled breaths, moments where he absorbs hits he could avoid. That choice matters. It signals that Goku is no longer surrendering entirely to the form. He is deciding when instinct takes priority and when conscious judgment must intervene. The body moves first, but the mind is no longer absent. It watches closely, ready to pull back before the form demands too much. This balance is what separates mastery from possession. Early Ultra Instinct consumes Goku. Later Ultra Instinct negotiates with him. And that negotiation is fragile. Too much ego, and the form destabilizes. Too much surrender, and Goku risks fading into pure reaction again. The tension between those extremes is what gives the form its narrative weight. It is powerful, but never safe. Effective, but never comfortable. Emotionally, this also changes how Goku relates to victory. Winning through Ultra Instinct doesn't feel triumphant. It feels narrow, temporary, almost borrowed. There is no satisfaction in perfect movement when the cost is erasure. That's why Goku's expression in these moments is often calm, even distant. He isn't enjoying the fight. He's managing it, containing it, treating the battle like a system that must be solved without triggering collapse. And this is where Ultra Instinct becomes a mirror rather than a weapon. It reflects the limits of Goku's philosophy. His love for combat, his desire to test himself endlessly, runs directly against a form that demands detachment. Mastering Ultra Instinct doesn't mean aligning with it fully. It means learning where it conflicts with who he is and adjusting just enough to survive the contradiction. The longer the story sits with this idea, the clearer it becomes that Ultra Instinct was never meant to replace Goku's identity. It exists to challenge it, to ask whether a fighter defined by growth can accept a power that forbids excess, whether instinct can coexist with ambition without tearing the body apart. And every time Goku steps into that state, he answers differently, sometimes with restraint, sometimes with risk. That unresolved tension is intentional. Because once Ultra Instinct becomes comfortable, it stops functioning as a limit breaker. It becomes just another transformation. And Dragon Ball is careful not to let that happen. The form remains conditional, situational, and costly. Not because Goku lacks skill, but because true mastery, in this case, would mean knowing when to let go before the system overrides him completely. And that understanding sets the stage for everything that follows, where Ultra Instinct is no longer the question of how strong Goku can become, but how much of himself he is willing to stake every time he steps beyond conscious control. That willingness to stake himself is what ultimately defines Ultra Instinct as Goku's true limit breaker. Not because it pushes power outward, but because it forces an inward reckoning. Every previous transformation asked how far his strength could go. Ultra Instinct asks how much of his agency he can afford to lose before victory becomes meaningless. That is a far more dangerous question, and the story treats it accordingly. When Goku begins to integrate Ultra Instinct into his broader combat philosophy, the form stops appearing as a miracle and starts functioning as a lens. Through it, the narrative examines the cost of efficiency without intention. A body that never hesitates is impressive, but a fighter who never hesitates cannot adapt to moral weight, long-term consequence, or sacrifice. Dragon Ball has always escalated through power, but it has survived through choice. Ultra Instinct threatens to sever that connection. This is why Goku never fully abandons his other states. Not out of necessity, but out of wisdom. Each form represents a different relationship with struggle. Super Saiyan is emotional honesty. Blue is discipline. Even imperfect states allow space for error, correction, and growth. Ultra Instinct allows none of that. It demands perfection in the moment, regardless of what comes after. Mastery, then, becomes the act of choosing when perfection is worth the price. In battle, this manifests as something subtle but critical. Goku no longer enters Ultra Instinct to overwhelm. He enters to reset, to neutralize momentum, to survive moments that would otherwise end the fight immediately. It is a scalpel, not a hammer, and that restraint keeps the form from collapsing the story's stakes. If Ultra Instinct were used freely, conflict would flatten. Instead, its rarity preserves tension. Every activation signals that something irreversible is approaching. From a lore perspective, this also recontextualizes the gods who wield or pursue the state. Their detachment is not a shortcut. It is a prerequisite. They can live inside Ultra Instinct because they have already surrendered what Goku still clings to: emotion, desire, self-definition through struggle. Goku's path is harder because he refuses to let go of those things entirely. His mastery is incomplete by design, and that incompleteness is what keeps him human. Emotionally, this leaves Ultra Instinct in a strange place. It is neither triumph nor failure. It is a reminder, a glimpse of what exists beyond effort, and a warning about the cost of staying there too long. Goku doesn't chase it because it feels good. He approaches it because sometimes the alternative is worse. And every time he does, the line between instinct and identity blurs just enough to matter. That is why Ultra Instinct remains compelling even after repeated appearances. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't settle. It continues to ask the same question in different forms. How much control can be surrendered before power stops serving the fighter? And how much restraint is required to keep that surrender from becoming permanent? In the end, Ultra Instinct is not Goku's strongest form. It is his most honest one. It exposes the truth that limits are not always broken by force. Sometimes they collapse quietly, when the body moves faster than the mind can follow, and the only real victory is knowing when to step back before instinct finishes the fight alone. And that knowledge is what ultimately keeps Ultra Instinct from becoming a dead end. If Goku ever treated it as a permanent solution, it would hollow him out. The form would win battles, but it would erase the reason those battles matter. Dragon Ball understands this instinctively. It keeps Ultra Instinct just out of reach, not because Goku is incapable, but because the story itself cannot afford a state where choice disappears completely. What Goku masters, then, is not Ultra Instinct in its purest sense, but the boundary around it. He learns how to approach that edge without falling over, how to let instinct guide motion without letting it dictate purpose. The mastery is quiet, almost invisible. It shows up in restraint rather than escalation, in the decision to disengage before the body shuts the mind out entirely. That is why Ultra Instinct remains volatile, not unfinished, but intentionally unresolved. It is a form that cannot be owned, only visited. And every time Goku steps into it, the cost is recalculated, not in damage taken, but in how close he comes to losing the part of himself that chooses to fight at all. This is what makes Ultra Instinct the true limit breaker. It doesn't ask how strong Goku can become. It asks how much he can risk becoming something else. That risk reshapes how every future confrontation is framed. Once Ultra Instinct exists, raw escalation loses its dominance. Stronger enemies are no longer just stronger. They are problems of timing, restraint, and exposure. The question shifts from whether Goku can overpower an opponent to whether he can afford the moment required to access that state without surrendering too much of himself in the process. Power becomes conditional, not absolute. This is why Ultra Instinct never feels like a cheat, even when the gap it creates is overwhelming. The form does not simplify combat. It complicates it. Goku must constantly evaluate the invisible cost curve. How long can instinct run before conscious thought fades? How many perfect evasions can his body execute before his internal rhythm fractures? The form demands awareness of its own erosion, and that awareness pulls Goku out of the very mindset Ultra Instinct requires. From a strategic standpoint, this creates a paradox. The better Goku understands Ultra Instinct, the harder it becomes to use it cleanly. Knowledge reintroduces hesitation. Hesitation disrupts instinct, and yet without that knowledge, the form consumes him faster. Mastery exists in a narrow band where understanding does not overpower surrender. That band is unstable, constantly shifting depending on emotional state, fatigue, and intent. This instability is reflected in how Ultra Instinct interacts with opponents who adapt rather than dominate. Fighters who survive long enough begin to notice patterns, not in movement, but in absence. Goku does not feint. He does not bait. He does not miscalculate. And that absence of error becomes information, not exploitable immediately, but revealing over time. The longer Ultra Instinct stays active, the more it defines the battlefield in rigid terms, and rigid systems eventually fracture under pressure. Narratively, this keeps Goku vulnerable in a way strength alone never could. He can be outlasted, not through endurance, but through patience. An opponent does not need to surpass Ultra Instinct. They only need to force it to remain active long enough for its internal contradiction to surface. That threat lingers even when Goku appears untouchable. This is also why Ultra Instinct resists being framed as evolution in the traditional Dragon Ball sense. It does not replace what came before. It sits alongside it, creating tension rather than resolution. Goku does not progress linearly toward it. He circles it, approaches it from different emotional states, and retreats when the cost becomes too high. Growth here is not additive. It is selective, and that selectiveness begins to influence how Goku defines victory itself. There are moments where winning with Ultra Instinct would be possible, but unacceptable. Moments where preserving choice outweighs ending the fight cleanly. Those decisions are subtle, rarely spoken, but they mark the true shift in Goku's philosophy. Strength is no longer the primary metric. Continuity of self is. That idea hangs over every activation of Ultra Instinct, turning each one into a calculated risk rather than a reflex. A step into a state that promises perfection, but only as long as nothing human interferes. And as Goku continues to fight, continues to care, continues to choose, that interference becomes inevitable, pulling against the form in ways that never fully resolve, because the moment they do, Ultra Instinct would cease to function as anything more than another transformation, and the story refuses to let it settle into that shape, and that refusal to let it settle is deliberate. Ultra Instinct is kept unstable because stability would mean acceptance, and acceptance would mean surrendering the tension that defines Goku's role in the story. The form exists to test him, not to complete him. It presses against his instincts, his joy in combat, his need to engage consciously with the opponent in front of him. Every time it appears, it asks the same quiet question again, and Goku's answer is never identical. By this point, mastery no longer looks like control in the traditional sense. It looks like judgment, knowing when instinct should lead and when it must be interrupted, knowing when perfection is necessary and when imperfection preserves something more important. Goku's Ultra Instinct is powerful precisely because it is imperfect, because it still leaks emotion, intent, and individuality into a state that was never designed to hold them. That friction generates risk, but it also generates meaning. From a broader Dragon Ball perspective, this reframes the idea of a final form. Ultra Instinct is not the end of Goku's growth. It is the boundary that defines it. Beyond it lies a version of combat stripped of desire and selfhood, and Goku consistently refuses to cross that line fully. Not because he can't, but because doing so would cost him the very reason he fights. The form becomes a warning as much as a weapon. This is why Ultra Instinct feels heavier than any transformation before it. Not louder, not flashier, heavier. It carries narrative gravity. Every activation bends the story inward, forcing attention onto consequences rather than outcomes. Victory achieved without choice is hollow. Survival without identity is temporary. And power without restraint is indistinguishable from collapse. In the end, Goku mastering Ultra Instinct does not mean conquering it. It means understanding what it threatens to take away. His true limit is not speed, strength, or reaction time. It is how close he can come to losing himself and still choose to step back. That choice, repeated again and again under pressure, is what defines Ultra Instinct as the true limit breaker. Not because it shatters ceilings, but because it forces Goku to confront the most dangerous boundary of all, the line where instinct ends and the self disappears.